Hi, hello. Welcome to the episode of Isaiah's Newsstand. It's your host, Isaiah Edwards. The date is March the 25th, 2025. Hopefully, this episode finds you well, in good spirits, and high hopes. As for me, I'm doing pretty good. I would say Tuesday treated me well. Work was steady. We definitely, I was stuck at the crusher all day, but no complaints. It was a solid day, flowed really well. Went to the gym. Gym was packed as it usually is on Tuesday. Actually wound up working a little bit later, working out a little bit later, because I tried to I can't get this machine, I can't get that machine. So let me just do some extra free weight activity. That was nice. But then, of course, the equipment opened up and I was like, ooh, let me get that. And then I do my whole, routine on the Smith machine, so to speak. And I mean, everything went well. It was nice, got a good pump, but definitely wound up, going a little longer. But that's okay. I got nothing really better to do. But that being said, I did want a podcast. I wanted to get my yap on. So yeah, now, that's where we're at. Here we are. But yeah, let's go ahead and do our startup and get into some news. We'll say I'm forgetting again. I did want to do a little book corner, finish another book. It's a part of the Black Company series I've been reading, mentioned before. It definitely come a long way. I would say the book feels less problematic to read, which is nice. But overall, I'm enjoying it still. It's still nice to read. I wanted to finish it, but I think that I have one more book that I just started the other day, and then I think there's at least one or two more books. So, I mean, hey, it's giving me something to read. That's nice. I enjoy that. But, I could also just be done with it and then, move on to whatever the next thing is. Anyway, let's go ahead and do our startup and get into it. All right. Our first story comes from NPR. Hamdan Ballal, a Palestinian director beaten by Israeli settlers, is now released. Hamdan, excuse me. Hamdan Ballal, one of the Palestinian directors of the Oscar-winning documentary "No Other Land," was attacked by Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank on Monday, according to eyewitnesses and his attorney. Ballal was then detained by Israeli forces, but was released on Tuesday. Ballal's lawyer, Leah Tismel, told NPR that her client said he was punched and kicked by a known settler and will file a complaint against him. Several residents and activists also described a violent scene that night. Just fast forwarding a bit. Just a few weeks ago, Ballal was on stage with fellow filmmakers in Los Angeles, accepting the Academy Award for a movie that documents how violent settlers try to intimidate Palestinians into leaving their homes. Now, Ballal has come into focus again after falling victim to such violence. The Israeli military said in a statement that security forces apprehended 3 Palestinians suspected of hurling rocks at them, as well as an Israeli civilian involved in the violent confrontation, and took them in for questioning. Witnesses and activists denied Ballal threw stones. In fact, from what I heard, it was the opposite. When they tried to run away, their vehicle was harassed, and they're getting stones thrown at them. But, once again, the Israeli military came in and said, nope, that actually isn't what happened. That's not what we heard. So now we're doing an investigation. On Monday, Kimmelman said he received an alert from Susia and drove along with other activists to the area to try to de-escalate the tense situation, but also document it. And I believe those are his friends. I kind of skimmed past that. Nasser Nawaja, who lives in Susia, the same Palestinian village as Ballal, told NPR that a group of masked Israeli settlers came Monday evening, right as people were getting ready to break the daily fast for the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The settlers attacked houses, smashed cars, and started attacking people, he said. Ballal was one of the people who were hurt. It's also worth noting, too, that Ballal practices nonviolence. He's not the only one, all of his group. So it's one of those things where it's like, look, we literally have video of us being attacked, not attacking. And you're saying, oh, well, reports we heard were that you guys were the one who were the aggressors. So that's why we came out here. Also, he was attacked, right? And it gets so bad that he's screaming out for help. And he's like, I got to go to an ambulance, or we got to get an ambulance. I got to go to the hospital. Ambulance comes, and that's when the Israeli military comes and snatches him out of the ambulance. So, I mean, there's good that there was at least pressure on this, I think, because, I mean, who could say what was going to happen if this was just another person who didn't have the high profile that Ballal had, which is obviously a really sad thing because this is something that happens a lot in the West Bank, especially, with tensions ratcheting up even more so post, the second ceasefire. So yeah, I mean, obviously this is really sad and unfortunate shit. But I am glad that at least we're dropping in, at the part of the story where at least Ballal is out, and, not more atrocities, more fucked up shit's happening to him, behind closed doors and, a prison cell or some shit. But yeah, let's go ahead and move along. From the Associated Press. Actually, I'm going to get re-centered here. Here we go. The site's playing with me. Okay. Trump officials texted attack plans to a group chat in a secure app that included a journalist. Oops-a-daisy. Top national security officials for President Donald Trump, including his defense secretary, texted plans for upcoming military strikes in Yemen to a group chat in a secure messaging app that included the editor-in-chief for The Atlantic. The magazine reported in a story posted online Monday. The National Security Council said the text chain appears to be authentic. So yeah, this is definitely going to be one of the bloopers for the Trump administration. This took place on Signal, which is like a secure messaging app. And the editor-in-chief mentioned was Jeffrey Goldberg. Apparently, Trump does not like this guy. They don't have a good rapport, so to speak. But, he's definitely wrote up some pieces on Trump, previously. It was not immediately clear if the specifics of the military operation were classified, but they often are, and at the least are kept secure to protect service members and operational security. The U.S. has conducted airstrikes against the Houthis since the militant group began targeting commercial and military vessels in the Red Sea in November of 2023. Now, we actually covered the attack that essentially Jeffrey Goldberg got roped into. Just 2 hours after Goldberg received the details of the attack on March 15th, the U.S. began launching a series of airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. And I think for Goldberg, when he initially gets the invite, he gets an invitation, I think it's through email, from Mike Waltz, one of the guys who's involved in the Signal group chat. There's some big names in here. I'm going to run them off in a second. But he gets this invite and he's like, I didn't think it was real. I thought it was some kind of disingenuous trap or something to try to feed me some false information that would blow up in my face. I just didn't really think that this is something that would happen. Like, this is a huge goof enough if true. So he's like, well, I got to see it through. So, I'm reading this and letting it kind of all roll out. No one stopped me. No one said, hey, who's this Goldberg guy? We didn't invite him. What's going on here? So he's just more or less a fly on the wall. And then next thing you know, he starts seeing like, hey, these guys aren't matching up. Like, this sounds like, now's as good a time as any. Let's see. There was Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Also, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Tulsi Gabbard, Trump's Director of National Intelligence. So he's like, yeah, no, all these people are matching up. And then they start dropping more information about these strikes, more details. And then, of course, 2 hours later, he's like, oh shit, they're happening. So this is definitely real. So once he, gathers enough information to be like, okay, this is not a thing I should be in, he leaves. And that's when they notice, oh shit, who's that guy? So they fucked up kind of royal here. Also, it's worth noting Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard. These are both, military experienced people. It's kind of crazy that people with this kind of background wouldn't have a stop, and say, hey, let me read the room here. Let me read this digital, take a little ocular survey, some shit. Nothing. They just let it rip. But let's go ahead and read a little bit further. Hegseth, in his first comments on the matter, attacked Goldberg as deceitful and a discredited so-called journalist, while alluding to previous critical reporting of Trump from the publication. He did not shed light on why Signal was being used to discuss the sensitive operation or how Goldberg ended up on the message chain. Because at the end of the day, you didn't have to have this on Signal. This is something you're allowed to do. Even Biden administration had people on Signal that they could talk. But usually you reserve these kind of conversations for what is it? I think it's called a SCIF. Let me go ahead and pull that up. Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. The SCIFs are secure rooms where government officials review and store classified information. They are known as SCIFs. You could have gone through any kind of, just more secure conversation or communication, or simply not had it over, text. But this was easy. Let's just be a little lazy. Let's just be a little comfy. And hey, not to mention with Signal, there's a potential that you can just have the messages deleted, which I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to do, by the way. But once again, maybe you kind of want that because you can just kind of, once again, let it rip. Say your true feelings if you're someone like J.D. Vance, which let me see if maybe it's time to get there. Now, the White House is saying that no classified material was sent to the thread. That being said, from Goldberg's perspective, he said, hey, I did not release any classified information. I have it, it's I believe a screenshot or something to that effect, but I didn't release it. Now, there is an investigation going on to how this happened, but I don't know if that's going to pan out anything in terms of any kind of reprimands. Let's see here. I'm trying to get to the JD Vance part. Chuck Schumer mad. I don't really care. A lot of shit here. Might just have to. Here we go. In a chain of messages, Vance questioned whether Americans would understand the importance of strikes that came with the risk of a moderate to severe spike in oil prices, and if the timing of the operation might be a mistake. I am willing to support the consensus of the team and keep these concerns to myself, Vance argued. But there is a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is, etc. Vance also made the case that Europe would benefit much more than the U.S. by the action aimed at decimating the Houthis and securing Red Sea shipping lanes. If you think we should do it, let's do it. I hate bailing Europe out again, Vance said in a back and forth with Hegseth. I fully share your loathing of the European freeloading. It's pathetic, Hegseth replied. Pathetic is in all caps. He added, I think we should go. The Vice President's Communications Director, William Martin, released a statement downplaying the debate. He said Vance unequivocally supports this administration's foreign policy. Also, another thing he kind of says in this thread is that he kind of, and this is something Vance has done throughout, which has kind of been like, hey, I'm going to disagree a little bit with Daddy Trump. But he does it in private. It's you catch it a little bit on a hot mic or something maybe. But essentially he's and he does it in a very light way. That's why it's not a big, huge deal. But essentially he's saying, yeah, I just don't think Trump understands what is being said and then what is going to be done. There's a bit of a disconnect here, and I want us to be more lined up if we can make that happen. But I do agree that this really isn't that big of a deal. I think it's something that can be smoothed over. This is all just a funny thing. Like, I initially was like, am I gonna cover this? Like, I could have covered it yesterday, but I just kind of didn't want to. But then I saw I was just making so many rounds, and then up to the point where literally Hillary Clinton like does a react on X where she's like, "Really, seriously?" And it's like, I mean, I guess because it's like it's crazy that they were barking down her door over fucking emails. And it's like, oh, all the emails, look at the emails. Meanwhile, fast forward now, literally you have someone like Pete Hegseth, who is like, a talking head or whatever, or, host, I should say, even more so, on Fox News, saying how, like, she should be going to jail. And then you have Donald Trump trying to make light of it. Like, this is like our first, like, oops-a-daisy. And, like, in, like, 2 months, we're doing real good. And this isn't even that serious. Mind you, there are people who were literally in Russia who were able to read this shit. And it's like, hey, this is encrypted, yes-ish, right? But, like, it could still get hacked. There's still potential liabilities here. If you've done this once, you could do it potentially again. What happens if the person you're adding isn't, an American journalist, but someone who, is a potential an operative, This is a potential hole here. So I guess you hope that this administration tightens up from here and we don't have any loose leaks, any loose threads or anything like that. But definitely just some bozo clown show shit. It is funny, at least. It's worth a laugh, a little bit of a giggle. But yeah, let's go ahead and move along. Let's get to the next story. Also Trump-related, unfortunately, from the Associated Press. Trump signs order seeking to overhaul U.S. elections, including requiring proof of citizenship. President Donald Trump on Tuesday signed a sweeping executive action to overhaul elections in the U.S., including requiring documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections and demanding that all ballots be received by Election Day. The order says the U.S. has failed to enforce basic and necessary election protections and calls on states to work with federal agencies to share voter lists and prosecute election crimes. It threatens to pull federal funding from states where election officials don't comply. The move, which is likely to face swift challenges because states have broad authority to set their own election rules, is consistent with Trump's long history of railing against election processes. He often claims elections are being rigged even before results are known, unless he wins, and has waged battles against certain voting methods since he lost in the 2020 election to Democrat Joe Biden and falsely blamed it on widespread fraud. Trump has focused particularly on mail voting, arguing without evidence that it's insecure and invites fraud, even as he has shifted his position on the issue given its popularity with voters, including Republicans. While fraud occurs, it's rare, limited in scope, and gets prosecuted. The order's documentary proof of citizenship requirement signals the president is not waiting for congressional Republicans to pass their long-anticipated Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or the SAVE Act, which has aimed to do the same thing. Essentially, he's kind of just hitting it with another barrel, right? So he's like, we're going to try this, and if it doesn't work, it gets dragged out in court, whatever, fine. But then, like, at least we'll still have the SAVE Act. So it's kind of like, it just kind of shows how much he wants this to happen. I'm going to skip ahead here. There are also concerns that married women who have changed their name will encounter trouble when trying to register because their birth certificate lists their maiden names. Such hiccups happened in recent town elections in New Hampshire, which has a state law requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. There's more details. But really, this is one of those things where I find that there's a conversation where some people are super happy about this, or they kind of shrug it off, and they say, well, this is just kind of heads up common sense stuff. I don't really hate it. You should just have these things. But there's another half of the conversation, which I'm more, hip to. I'm more in agreement with, what have you, where these are nuisance laws. Like, yes, you should have these things, of course, to, vote, yada, yada, yada. But in the situation where we just mentioned with, like, the birth certificate, or a situation where you don't have these things, maybe you're a younger person, you don't need it, you don't have, like, a license or whatever, you just don't have this documentation, it can be harder for you to then vote because you have to go through this extra hurdle, and you just decide to not vote. Like it just kind of locks you out. And it's this weird thing because once again, Trump waffles on this because he realizes like, hey, I need people to vote. I need you to vote. I don't care how you do it. Just get out there and vote, God damn it. But you also want to hype this thing of when you feel like you're behind, that there's some conspiracy, right? And that, oh, it's all these illegal migrants and people who are non-citizens who are voting. This is a fraud. This is a sham. But it's like, no, dude, more times than not, that is a very small percentage situation, and it's usually caught. It's usually prosecuted. You know, this administration, this Doe shit too, like, they keep wanting to talk about all this fraud that they're catching and they're calling out. But it's like, no, dude, this shit is already being called out. It's already being as addressed as possible. The stupid things that you're going through is really just making America worse. You're just trying to put a knife to the shit and gut it for what? Their own self-interest. That's what. But I at least wanted to kind of talk about this a bit. It just popped before I went on. So I was like, yeah, let's just go ahead and talk about it so I don't lose track of it. But let's go ahead and move on to the next story from the BBC. Sudan army accused of killing hundreds in airstrike on Darfur market. A Sudanese war monitor has accused the military of killing hundreds of people in an airstrike on a market in the country's western Darfur region. The Emergency Lawyers Group, which documents abuses by both sides in Sudan's civil war that erupted in April of 2023, said the bombing of Tura Market was a horrific massacre that had also left hundreds injured. Videos posted on social media, some by the army's rival, the Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, a paramilitary group that controls much of Darfur, showed the smoking ruins of market stalls and bodies charred beyond recognition. The military has denied this, but we're saying that with the RSF, yes, they've done a lot of atrocities and that's a known thing, but also so has the Sudanese army, and not to mention the RSF only has drones. Like that's like the capability that they're able to unleash in the air, whereas like the Sudanese army has the ability to do an airstrike like this. So one kind of matches and the other one doesn't. So I mean, the military can kind of deny it, but it looks like this is on them. Let's see. The BBC has not been able to confirm the death toll or the exact date of the attack on the market, which is located about 35 kilometers or 21 miles north of the army-held city of El Fasher. A Darfur activist group, the Darfur Initiative for Justice and Peace, said it happened on Monday and called it the deadliest single bombing since the beginning of the war. Now, this also comes on the heels of information that the Sudanese army has kind of made big strides in Khartoum, major city in Sudan. And, this was, hailed as good news because it's potentially a big turning point in the civil war. RSF has definitely been battling back, taking areas back. I believe they have some kind of support from like Saudi Arabia. Don't quote me on that, but at least they're buying weapons or something to that effect. And it's been keeping them in this fight. But, there's been moments where it's like, okay, the Sudanese army has definitely been making pushes. So, like, that was held as a good news thing. But then, obviously, this drops, and it's like, hey, it's once again the conversation of it's not just the RSF doing atrocities, which, once again, are horrible, are terrible. I don't really want to get into the weeds about all that. But also, by the same coin, by the same fucking token, the Sudanese army is also doing atrocities as well. Not just this airstrike. So... it's sad to come and talk about these kind of things for sure. It's not easy to, but, you got to try to highlight this shit and make note of it as best we can, best I can, and, hopefully this shit, finds some kind of end, because all these wars, all these things, they do have to come to a conclusion, right? And I'm going to use that as a segue to our last story, in regards to Russia and Ukraine. Not quite there, but anyway, we'll get to it. Last break time to be exact. I'm losing my voice a little bit. From NBC News. Russia and Ukraine agree to Black Sea ceasefire, Trump administration says. The White House said Tuesday, that Russia and Ukraine had agreed to a ceasefire in the Black Sea and to implement a ban on attacks on energy facilities by the two neighbors, an apparent breakthrough after American negotiators held separate talks with both countries. If implemented, the agreements could mark a major step towards a wider deal to end the 3-year-long war, which began when Russia launched a large-scale invasion of its smaller neighbor. Negotiators had agreed both countries would ensure safe navigation, eliminate the use of force, and prevent the use of commercial vessels for military purposes in the Black Sea, the White House said in 2 separate statements. Both statements also said that Russia and Ukraine would stop striking each other's energy facilities. So there you go. I mean, there's essentially another layer on this cake that we're calling a road to a ceasefire, maybe a ceasefire once it's all added up. Now, I think both sides are very trepidatious about this. So it remains to be seen how this is all going to hold up. If people are going, if one side or the other is going to say, oh, we're going to still do some subterfuge, we're going to still do shit. But if holding, then this is going to be good for both sides. You at least get more transport, less friction, less static in the Black Sea. So, I mean, this stands to be a good thing. And also maybe a further cementing of this whole infrastructure holdout thing, which is something I mentioned before, but I know that some people are saying, well, hey, that does matter. It is relevant, but it's less of an actual concession from Russia or anything like that, because this is, we're getting to the summertime. There's going to be less of, we're at least getting to spring, I should say. So we're getting to a less of it doesn't matter as much that we're in the winter. You don't need the energy like that. But that being said, I still think it's worth noting that it's like, hey, if this infrastructure, thing can hold, that's good. If this Black Sea thing can hold, that's even better, right? And maybe, just maybe, we are getting closer to an actual ceasefire. But I really do think that Russia's kind of playing around, and we really haven't seen exactly what they want, what is actually going to make them say, hey, we'll do a ceasefire. It's almost like they're playing for time, So, I mean, who knows? We'll see. But this was an update that I felt was relevant and worth covering, so I figured, hey, we'll close out with that. And on that note, that's the episode. Let's see. If you'd like to help out, support the effort, I do have a Patreon. Patreon.com/Isaiah News. Become a newsie today. Shout outs are coming up in a few days. I think, I guess maybe officially next week, right? But if you want if you want to be a part of the newsy roll call, now's a good time. You become a newsy. Hit the Patreon. Anyway, otherwise, it's just a tip jar, whatever. Anyway, for ways to hit me up, IsaiahNews1@gmail.com. Feel free to follow me or the podcast on any of the socials. Subscribe to the YouTube. Follow me on TikTok. Follow on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. All those are free ways to really help out, as well as leaving a like, leaving a cool comment. Sharing is caring. If they got stars, give me all 5 of them. Those are all nice ways to help out the effort. But yes, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for being a friend. And hopefully I'll see you soon for some more good news. I love ya. Bye-bye. Mwah.